What is up, Review and Preview fans? Back at it here with another episode tonight, and I'm excited to reveal my 2023 NFL mock draft. And the way I'm going to go about this is fairly unique. Rather than telling you, I'm going to talk this out and show you as we go along. But first and foremost, before I dive into the meat of this episode, please make sure to check us out on all of our social media if you haven't already on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We're on TikTok as well at Review and Preview. We'll also be doing a live stream Thursday night to cover all of round one for the draft. As we get into our mock, the way I'm going to go about this, I'm going to use Pro Football Network. I trust them the most. They've been a little bit more accurate with their grades than PFN. I'll say that. So we're gonna go share my screen here, and we're gonna get this started shortly. All right, we're gonna go full screen, and we're gonna close out the ads. Let's draft. So we all know that the Carolina Panthers traded up with the Chicago Bears for the number one overall pick in this year's draft. And we know the current situation, new head coach with Frank Reich. They brought in all of the top four quarterbacks in this year's draft for top 30 visits. We know they're trying to reset their team after letting Christian McCaffrey go. The Baker Mayfield experiment, I should say, did not work last year. Sam Darnold left for the San Francisco 49ers. So right now, Carolina is pretty much in limbo as far as the quarterback position goes. I know Matt Corral is still there, but all in all, I think this is a position where it can be one of two guys. I think they're the top two quarterbacks in this draft, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. I think with the number one overall pick, the Carolina Panthers will select Bryce Young, quarterback, out of Alabama. So that is the first pick, ladies and gentlemen. I think he's going to be a great pro, and we'll wait to see what happens on draft night. Now, moving on to number two overall, we have the Houston Texans. A lot of people are mad they didn't get the number one overall pick. Well, so be it. They have a new head coach once again this year in DeMeco Ryans. A lot of people have argued, hey, defensive-minded coach means they can go a defensive player here with Will Anderson Jr., being that they own the number 12 overall pick if they like a quarterback later on. So I think it's interesting, right? Houston lacks a lot of positions on their roster. I think if Houston really wants CJ Stroud, you take him at number two. And ultimately, as much as I like to think that D'Amico will go with Will Anderson and take a quarterback at 12, the safe bet is to take CJ Stroud, the Ohio State Buckeye, at number two overall. I have not been too impressed with CJ Stroud throughout his collegiate career. Again, he struggled against Notre Dame. He played with a lot of great wide receiver talent. We all know the negative stemming off of Ohio State quarterbacks, but CJ Stroud is a fine young talent, and I think he'll be just A-OK in the NFL. Not sure if he'll be anything special, but he has to be the pick there if you're the Houston Texans. Next up, we have the Arizona Cardinals, new head coach, also a defensive-minded guy in Jonathan Gannon. They're in need of a lot of different pieces. One position they don't need, though, for right now is a quarterback with Kyler Murray. They're stuck on a terrible contract with him. They need to revamp a lot. DeAndre Hopkins is on the trade market. But, the obvious answer for Arizona here should be to go with the best player available. And that best player available is Will Anderson Jr., the edge rusher out of Alabama, who had a phenomenal 2021 season. 2022 defenses were eyeing him more. He saw a lot of double teams. But I think Will Anderson Jr. is the best overall prospect in this year's draft, and he'll go number 3 overall to the Arizona Cardinals. Next up, number 4. This is the first real unsure pick for me. I think this could be one of two. It'll either be Anthony Richardson or it'll be Will Levis. I think the Colts need to take a quarterback here. We all know they got rid of Matt Ryan. They released him. And it's been a cycle ever since Andrew Luck retired. They've been unable to replace him. They tried Carson Wentz. Phillip Rivers was good for 1 year, but then he retired. And you had Matt Ryan most recently. So now it's time to go a different route. The Colts have a new head coach. in Shane Steichen. It's a new day in Indianapolis. And ultimately, I think that they will go with Anthony Richardson because of the upside. But the problem with that is he's nowhere near NFL ready. He should have stayed at Florida one more year, in my opinion. If this were next year, he might be the number one overall pick in next year's draft. But something tells me they could go Levis, but for the sake of this, I think Steichen is going to roll the dice here and take Anthony Richardson at number 4 overall. So he is officially off my board. So we have 3 quarterbacks going within the first 4 picks. The Seattle Seahawks are up next. They're also a team that could take a quarterback, potential future, guy that can learn under Geno Smith. I know they just gave him a 3-year extension for about 37 million a year. It's a lot of money for Geno Smith, a guy who really just had one good season ever since bouncing around the NFL between the Jets and the Chargers, and now Seattle. But Seattle needs help all over their roster. They lost Bobby Wagner a couple of years ago. That Legion of Boom is now dead. Receiver-wise, they're fine. That's their one strength on the roster, although they could add some depth. The value does not match at number 5 overall. Ultimately, I think they could go one of 2 different ways here. They could either go with Jalen Carter out of Georgia or Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. So it's tough. I don't see Jalen Carter falling out of the top 5. I really don't. And Seattle's defense has been broken for the past couple of years. They need to focus on improving their defense in this draft. And why not draft the best available defensive player in Jalen Carter who can help stop the run? 6'3", 314. He is a decent pass rusher for a guy his size. But again, despite his high-level athleticism, we know that Jalen Carter can stop the run really well. So that is a guy that I think typically wouldn't get picked there because of his position, but he is such a good talent. And if all the off the field issues didn't come up, he might have went in the top 3. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions. When I think of the Lions, I think they need a corner. They just traded away Jeff Okudah to the Atlanta Falcons. I know they signed a couple in free agency. They got Sutton, they got Emmanuel Mosley. But you want veterans in to go and groom a young corner. And I think the best corner in this year's draft is Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, not Christian Gonzalez. I like both, but I like Witherspoon a tad more. Really aggressive player. He's good at press man. He has all the skills, and I'll click this here so you can see not terrible size, 5'11", $180. He's really good. He's very violent. He makes a lot of hard hits. He's a good tackler, and I have Devin Witherspoon mocked to the Detroit Lions. Up next, the Las Vegas Raiders. This is an interesting pick here. They got Jimmy Garoppolo, and they acquired him. The Raiders are a team that missed the playoffs last year. Josh McDaniels, I think, in his second year as head coach, you could definitely go with Jimmy G for a couple of years, but we all know he has an injury history. The Raiders have a lot of needs on their roster, especially up front and on defense. But ultimately, I think you have to go with the quarterback here and take Will Levis. I'm not sure if Will Levis should be valued as the 7th overall pick, but ultimately that's what I think the Las Vegas Raiders are going to do. Levis can sit for a year behind Jimmy Garoppolo, and from then it can be a battle. I think it's a good pick the Raiders need to make. They have to start over at quarterback. Levis was really good at Kentucky the last few seasons. And I think he'll be a decent pro. I'm not sure if he'll be a franchise quarterback, but this is definitely a draft where it's quarterback heavy. And I think Will Levis is a good value pick at number 7, quite frankly. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons, and they could take one of 3 players here. There's Tyree Wilson on the board, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech. There is Pete Skoronski, the offensive lineman out of Northwestern. And then there's Bijan Robinson. There's a lot of talk about them potentially taking Bijan Robinson. I'm not so sure what is going to happen ultimately. Um, I don't know if a running back should be taken eighth overall, especially since they have Tyler Algier out of Penn State. I thought he was fine last year. Why not go with him? I know with Desmond Ritter, you want to build around him. You have Drake London. You have Kyle Pitts and Drake London, two players to build off of. Atlanta spent a lot of money on their defense in the offseason. I believe they got Jesse Bates. I believe they got Bud Dupree as well at number 8 overall. I think they're willing to build the offense on day 2 and day 3. So I'm going to go with Tyree Wilson here for the Atlanta Falcons. Good edge rusher, violent off the edge, can make some plays happen. Up next, Chicago Bears. For me, this is pretty obvious here. I think, realistically speaking, it's one of these two. It's either Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. Again, he's done a really, really good job over the last couple of years, or Pete Skoronski, who's very versatile, could potentially be a guy to replace Jake Matthews. I'm sorry, not Jake Matthews. The Bears desperately need a tackle, whether it's Wright or Skoronski. Based off of Chicago's needs, if they want a true left tackle, the best true left tackle in this draft, in my opinion, is Darnell Wright. So I'm going to give them Darnell Wright for that reason. Not saying that he's better than Pete Skoronski, but I'm saying that Darnell Wright best fits the Chicago Bears. All right, next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. They still have a lot of pieces from last year's Super Bowl team, although they have lost a few. They lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They lost Isaac Seumalo on the offensive line. They lost Miles Sanders to the Carolina Panthers. They lost a bunch of other pieces defensively as well. Javon Hargrave. They lost Kaiser White. The list goes on. And TJ Edwards as well. So realistically speaking, I think the best defensive player on the board is the way to go here. There is talk about Bijan Robinson. Personally, I think they should roll with Kenneth Gainwell this season and potentially draft a running back in the later rounds. I think Christian Gonzalez should be the pick here for Philadelphia, and that's what I'm going to give them. I have Christian Gonzalez mocked to the Philadelphia Eagles. They could use a corner. And again, build for today, plan for tomorrow, right? So that's going to be a big theme here in this draft. Tennessee, this is obvious. They just lost Taylor Lewan. They lost Nate Davis. It's Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern. They need an offensive lineman to fill that void. Next up, we have the Houston Texans. And for me, I'm looking at the receivers on the board here because you want to give C.J. Stroud the best opportunity to succeed. They lost Brandon Cooks. I think why not give C.J. Stroud his running mate at Ohio State and Jackson Smith-Njigba? I know he missed a lot of the season, and if you look at the stats, he's only had one true full season of stats since he played with Olave and Garrett Wilson, but that was his most productive year. So give me Jackson Smith-Njigba as the first receiver off the board to pair with C.J. Stroud. I don't have Smith-Njigba as my top rated receiver, but the connection with C.J. Stroud would be awesome. And that's a little bit out of the box there by me, taking two offensive players to a team that is typically built off defensive-minded head coaches over the last few years, but that's what I'm going to do there. Green Bay, they're an interesting case. They're a tough code to crack. There's a guy that's really impressed me, and they need depth at the edge rusher position. So for me, it's either going to be Myles Murphy out of Clemson or Nolan Smith out of Georgia. It's going to be interesting. I don't know what the right fit is here. I really don't. But the more I sit here and think about this, I think the Packers are going to bypass on Murphy and take Nolan Smith out of the University of Georgia. People say, oh, that might be a little too high. But again, they need to replace their edge rushing depth. Again, Preston Smith is 31. They lost Darius Smith to the Vikings last season. Rashawn Gary really hasn't panned out right now. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, and you need edge rushing depth, and the Packers are notorious for taking defensive players in the first round. Next up, we have the New England Patriots. For them, they're an interesting case. They can go tackle. They can go Brian Branch in the secondary. They can go corner. There's a lot of ways they can go here. Bill Belichick typically finds players, really good defensive players on both sides of the football. It's tough. We know Bill Belichick is classic for drafting edge rushers, but I don't think he's going to do it this time around. I don't. I have the New England Patriots selecting, where is he? I have them selecting Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State. I wanted to put him on the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I just couldn't do it. Joey Porter Jr. brings a lot. They have to replace J.C. Jackson. It's a premium position of need. He's the best corner on the board at this point, in my opinion, since Gonzalez and Witherspoon are off. So, yeah, I have New England lining him up opposite of Jonathan Jones week 1 of 2023. Up next, we have the New York Jets. Again, they traded down thanks to acquiring Aaron Rodgers by 2 picks. This is an obvious one for me. The Jets need to protect Aaron Rodgers. He's 39 years old. They have the weapons already with Garrett Wilson and company, C.J. Uzomah, Tyler Conklin, Breece Hall. All in all, I think the Jets are in a really good spot to be successful next season, but they have to shore up their front line. I think Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State ultimately is the pick here, heading to the New York Jets, number 15 overall. Next up, 16, Washington Commanders. Washington loves to do the unthinkable here. We haven't seen too many defensive players go off the board yet. It's been slightly more offense, I'd say about 60-40 up to this point. But I think they're going with safety Brian Branch out of Alabama, and I explain why. You look at their defense. They have a lot of Alabama players. You look at their 2 defensive tackles up front. They could improve over Derek Forrest and Cameron Curl in their secondary, and I think Branch brings the versatility that they need. And I think, again, safeties sometimes get undervalued in drafts like this, but we saw what happened to Xavier McKinney in 2020, falling out of the second round. But I do think Branch winds up going here. I think Washington pulls the trigger on him. I think he's a good selection for them at number 16. Next up, Pittsburgh Steelers. They could use weapons here. They could go after Jordan Addison. They could draft a tackle with Broderick Jones. They could add a corner. They can use an edge rusher. They could use a lot. But ultimately, I think you want to replace Dan Moore. You want to get a good offensive lineman. And the best one on the board is Broderick Jones. And that's what I'm going with. Protect Kenny Pickett at all costs. Give him an opportunity to succeed and shore up that offensive line in year number 2. Next up, the Detroit Lions. So I went Devin Witherspoon there for them. A lot of people let's shore up the defense for the Detroit Lions this season. Let's get that squared away. Yes, that's great. But look at the value on the board right now. We selected a corner for them already. Myles Murphy could be an interesting pick here. An edge rusher that can get to the quarterback. I think that would be a decent play. They could use a tight end as well. I think the best one on the board is Michael Mayer. It's very, very tough for me to make a selection here because I think there's a lot of different ways this can wind up going. But ultimately, I believe that the Detroit Lions are going to wind up selecting Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame because Dan Campbell, former tight end, loves tight ends. They lost TJ Hawkinson last season. Their starter currently penciled in is Brock Wright, who also went to Notre Dame. I think he can be a solid backup to his former college teammate and Michael Mayer. Tampa Bay Bucks are up next. Jason Licht, their GM, again, post-Tom Brady era. You have to protect whoever's starting a quarterback this year, whether it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask. And I think you want to shore up the offensive line. Licht is really good at drafting offensive linemen. I mean, you still have Ryan Jensen, and Tristan Wirfs, but you don't have Donovan Smith anymore. I mean, there's a lot of issues on the offensive line, and I think ultimately they're going to go. Again, this might be a little bit of a reach here, but I'm going to go with Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma on their offensive line at number 19. You want to shore up for whoever's playing quarterback this season, and you want to try to build the bookend tackles, and I think that would be a decent pick for them. Up next, we have the Seattle Seahawks. This was a hard pick for me. I mean, we took Jalen Carter at number 5 overall. I don't want to just sit here and say we're going to go defense again, but we're going to go defense again. This time, we're going to take Myles Murphy, the edge rusher, out of Clemson. Now, I know he fell further than some people would have liked him to go, but I think that's where he ends up. I think it's a guy that you can say, hey, we like you, but we don't value you at number 5 overall, like some people have put him at. Ultimately, I think it's a good selection there, shoring up that defensive front and rebuilding it to an extent. All right, so next up here we have the LA Chargers. They're an interesting case. There's a lot going on with them right now, and I don't know what they're going to do. They're trying to contend for a Super Bowl this year. I mean, you have the Kansas City Chiefs in that division. It's very tough for me to figure out what they want to do here. Obviously, we still have some good offensive playmakers on the board. With all the Austin Eckler rumors going around, I honestly think Bijan Robinson has been connected to them. And the next team I could potentially see taking Bijan is Dallas. I don't think they should. I think they should roll with Tony Pollard on the franchise tag. I think the Chargers are going to take Bijan Robinson at number 21 overall. Yep, I just did it. I truthfully think he's going to go there. So that's my 21st overall pick. A lot of people argue he's been the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. Some people think he's even better than Barkley. And this isn't 2003 anymore. Running backs aren't going high in drafts. But Bijan Robinson I have at number 21 overall. Next up, we have the Baltimore Ravens. For this pick, I'm not so certain where they're going to go. There's receiver here. It's an option. The typical pick is to go with a wide receiver. I really like Jordan Addison out of USC. I think there's a real chance they go with him. You kind of want that bona fide number 1 guy. Addison a little bit smaller at 5 feet 11 inches tall. So I thought about him, and I also thought about Quinton Johnson out of TCU, averaging 22 yards per catch. I think this is an electric player that could really benefit Baltimore here. Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay are around a similar size. I think they need a taller wide receiver on their roster, which is why I'm going to give them Quinton Johnston at number 22 overall rather than Jordan Addison. Next up, Minnesota Vikings are on the clock. Now there's rumors. All right, Kirk Cousins, last year of his deal. Are they going to take a quarterback and take Hendon Hooker? Well, I really don't know. I don't think it's wise to take Hendon Hooker at 23 overall. So I am not on that bandwagon, actually. I think Minnesota needs help in the secondary. They had to restructure Harrison Smith. They lost Cam Dantzler. They lost Patrick Peterson. They're rebuilding from scratch. And I think the best corner here is what you go with. Deonte Banks is 6 foot, 197 pounds. He's lean. I really think he's good in the press man scheme. I think Brian Flores will love him on defense. And I think Deonte Banks out of Maryland is the pick for Minnesota. Up next, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. I love what they have going offensively for them right now with Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram, all their receivers. I think they're in a really good spot. But in the AFC, you have so many elite quarterbacks, and what you need in return is elite pass rushers. So I think here it's between three players: Lucas Van Ness, Isaiah Foskey, and Will McDonald. A lot of people like Will McDonald. I don't think he's worthy of the number 24 overall pick. I think it's down to Van Ness or Foskey. I do think an edge rusher is key. I know they drafted Josh Allen a few years ago, but it really hasn't panned out the way it is. They wanted him to be the guy, and right now he's just a guy. So I think they're adding Lucas Van Ness to their edge rushing room to play opposite of Josh Allen. You have to get to the quarterback, and Van Ness proved worthy of that at Iowa this past season. And now we have the Giants. So the Giants could go in a couple different directions. They can go corner. They can go receiver. They can go best player available if they want. They've been connected to Zay Flowers. They've been connected to Jordan Addison. They brought Cam Smith in for a top 30 visit. I could see the Giants trading out of this pick. I don't know what's going to happen, but Jordan Addison's still sitting here on the board. And if he's still sitting here on the board, I don't care what his size is. He's really, really good. He can move downfield with blazing speed. He's more of an outside receiver, which is something I think the Giants will love, and it gives Daniel Jones a weapon that they need. So if this is how the board plays out and Addison is still here, I think you take him. I really do. Now, I don't necessarily want the Giants to take a wide receiver in round one, but if the board plays out this way, this is what you have to do. Jordan Addison to the New York Giants at number 25. Next up, Dallas. So Dallas is in a very interesting scenario. They lost Ezekiel Elliott. Bijan's not on the board. They could look at Jahmyr Gibbs potentially. They lost Dalton Schultz in free agency. Dalton Kincaid is here. They could go from a Dalton to another Dalton. They could shore up their run defense a little bit with Brian Bresee. Isaiah Foskey is there, best player on the board right now. Ultimately, I think Jerry Jones is going to look at this and take the opportunity to say, hey, we want to improve our football team. We want to draft the best player that fits our needs. And when you look at the NFC East, right, it's getting really, really good again. Yet Washington has a lot of weapons on offense. The Giants have added a lot with Darren Waller, Paris Campbell, bringing Darius Slayton back. You look at the Eagles with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. And you look at Dallas. You have CeeDee Lamb, you have Tony Pollard, and who else is there, right, on that receiving core? Michael Gallup, right? There's not a whole lot of depth, and they're missing a tight end. And I think Dalton Kincaid is where they go at number 26 overall, the tight end out of Utah, to replace Dalton Schultz. I know Peyton Hendershot and Jake Ferguson were viable options last year, but you want to get Dak another weapon, and I think Dalton Kincaid is a solid pick. Next up, we have the Buffalo Bills. There's trade rumors about Stephon Diggs. Them and the Giants are typically interested in the same players. They lost Tremaine Edmonds in free agency. That was their biggest loss. They could replace him with, in my opinion, the best linebacker in this draft is Jack Campbell. They could go in that direction. But Zay Flowers is still sitting on the board here at number 27, and I'm sending him to Buffalo. They like him a lot. They could use another receiver behind Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. So ultimately, I think Zay Flowers is going to be another nice weapon for Josh Allen. Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock. Contrary to popular belief, I don't think they need a tight end as much as people make out to be. Yes, I know Hayden Hurst is gone, but you got Irv Smith Jr. in free agency. You got Drew Sample. The tight end room is not awful. The corner room is, though. And if you're going to contend and defend against the elite quarterbacks in the AFC, you need good corners. So here, I have the Bengals selecting Cam Smith out of South Carolina. I like him a little more than Kelee Ringo. Next up, number 29, the New Orleans Saints in an interesting spot here. I don't know where they go with this pick, to be honest with you. I've looked at their needs and where they could potentially go. There's a lot of rumors that they could use help on the offensive line. So I'm going to go ahead and it's really tough too because there's a lot of good players still on the board here for the Saints. The pass rush. I'm just looking at the quarterbacks in the NFC South, right? The Bucks. I mean, I guess Baker is slotted in as QB1 right now. If the Panthers draft Bryce Young, that'll be a rookie. And then the Atlanta Falcons will have Desmond Ridder. So for the Saints, I realistically think you want to worry more about you and what you have as an offense. And I think they're going to go with Osiris Torrance, the guard out of Florida, at number 29 overall. Cesar Ruiz hasn't really worked out for them. They're a little shorthanded on the interior offensive line, and Osiris Torrance is the best interior offensive line prospect available at this time. Two more picks. We have the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, so Philadelphia, they could use some work. We went Christian Gonzalez with them before. I don't know ideally what they're going to do here, but I do think there's some truth to them needing defensive line and edge rusher help. Isaiah Foskey is still here on the board. Again, he stayed 3 years at Notre Dame. I don't know if he's the pick. Brandon Graham is getting older. They brought him back on a one-year deal. They still have Josh Sweat. I'm trying to think who their other edge rusher is. It is on the tip of my tongue. Hassan Reddick. There we go. Jordan Davis at defensive tackle. Milton Williams at defensive tackle. They lost Javon Hargrave. They could use some more depth. Ultimately, I went with Brian Bresee here at number 30 for Philadelphia. Fell a little bit more than I thought he would in this draft, but he does wind up cracking the first round for me. Last but not least, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs offensively, I think they're fine. Receiver is not high value here. They could go edge rusher. They could go DT. Jahmyr Gibbs is there, but the Chiefs are fine at running back now with Pacheco. So I thought about this a lot. And ultimately, I think they're going with an edge rusher, but I don't know if they're going with Isaiah Foskey or Will McDonald. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what they ultimately do, but I think the Chiefs will ultimately go with the top edge rusher on the board here and Isaiah Foskey. So that is our mock draft. Take a look at the full results here. Just get rid of these pop-up ads. They're always super annoying. So number one overall, we went Bryce Young to the Carolina Panthers. C.J. Stroud went second to the Houston Texans. Will Anderson Jr. went third to the Arizona Cardinals. The Colts fill their quarterback void with Anthony Richardson at number 4. Jalen Carter goes to the Seattle Seahawks at number 5. Devin Witherspoon to the Detroit Lions at number 6. Will Levis to the Raiders at 7. Tyree Wilson, the edge rusher, to the Falcons at 8. The Bears get a new tackle and Darnell Wright at number 9. The Eagles get depth in the secondary with Christian Gonzalez. Pete Skoronski joins a paper-thin Titans offensive line. Jackson Smith-Njigba, first receiver off the board to the Houston Texans to play with his former college quarterback. Nolan Smith continues to rise, but he rises to lucky number 13 to the Green Bay Packers. New England selects J.C. Jackson's replacement and Joey Porter Jr. The Jets shore up their offensive line, selecting Paris Johnson Jr. to compete with Max Mitchell and Mekhi Becton. Washington adds a secondary leader in Brian Branch, a huge upgrade over what they have. The Steelers get a tackle in Broderick Jones to help better protect Kenny Pickett. Michael Mayer fills the tight end void left by T.J. Hawkinson in Detroit. The Bucs replace Donovan Smith with Anton Harrison. The Seattle Seahawks add Myles Murphy at the edge rusher position at number 20. The Chargers get Bijan Robinson, 21st overall, in lieu of the trade rumors of Austin Eckler. The Ravens go with Quentin Johnston to get a big body receiver to pair along with Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman. Deontay Banks, selected by the Vikings at number 23 overall, fills a big void there that they need. The Jaguars go with an edge rusher to help their pass rushing unit get to opposing AFC quarterbacks. The Giants select a much-needed bona fide potential number one receiver in Jordan Addison. The Cowboys draft Dalton Kincaid to replace Dalton Schultz, a tight end. Zay Flowers to the Buffalo Bills, another weapon for Josh Allen, and a prototypical Bills wideout. Cam Smith replaces Eli Apple for the Cincinnati Bengals at 28. The Saints add up more beef in their O-line with Osiris Torrance. The Eagles select Brian Bresee to help provide more depth to fill in for that loss of Javon Hargrave via free agency. The first round gets rounded out by the Chiefs selecting Isaiah Foskey. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my review and preview mock draft. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. Really appreciate it. Remember, stay tuned for our live NFL draft coverage tomorrow. Check us out on all of our social media platforms. We appreciate you all, and I will catch you all on the next episode.